Hi everyone, welcome to my version of Tim Holtz's 12 tags of 2015. This is the February tag, and I did take this a little while ago thinking that I would be early this month, and then I've had a whole load of videos to edit as part of my design team work and other bits and pieces like, oh yes, Valentine's Day, and here we are. I'm just about editing this video today. So if you remember, this year I'm going to make a tag and I'm going to make a little 3-inch square, and I want to turn the 3-inch square into a little sort of patchwork of art when I finish at the end of the year. So February is going to be no different, and this is Tim's gorgeous and romantic February tag. So as usual, I'm starting out with a 3 by 6 inch tag and a 3-inch square for my little sampler piece. So this month Tim showed us how to cover the tag using a paper collaging technique. It's something I've seen used in mixed media before, but it's the first time I've actually tried it myself, and I really have enjoyed it. And you already have seen it as it happens, because I used it on a Valentine's project which just happened to get posted before this one. So this is my first time of trying the paper piece in, and I've gathered together a few bits of what can I call it, ephemera. And I had a little paper pack with lots and lots of bits and pieces I was intending to make a scrapbook page with, but it turned out it was perfect for making this romantic collage. So the idea of this technique is to layer up lots and lots of bits of paper and patterns to create a background, and you're going to need lots of little scraps of paper in order to do this. So, as I said, you can use this technique to cover lots of different things. So before you begin, you really want to think about your colour scheme and then just mix and match all sorts of bits and pieces. They can be scraps of paper, they can be die cuts, they can be scraps that you've had left over from making cards or scrapbooking, as I have here. And I'm just pulling together some of the bits and pieces that are small enough and the right colours that I want to use on my tag. The other thing that I did was look up romantic free vintage images on Pinterest, and I've just copied some of them onto a page in Word and printed those out as well. So first of all, I'm just starting to collect together a few scraps. So I'm cutting things a little bit smaller, bearing in mind the proportions of the tag which I'm about to cover, and then I'm just having a little bit of a dry run of where I'm going to place some of these elements. Now you will get to a point where you think, right, I really must start to put some of this into place. Now I've seen people take photographs at this stage so that they can put things back together the way that they initially intended. I'm still playing a little bit here. It does look a bit of a mishmash at the moment, but once I get going with gluing things into place, you can see how it all takes shape. So as you start to glue things down, what you want to decide is what kind of medium that you're going to use. You're going to need to seal these papers once you've created your collage in order to do the next sort of little shadowing technique that I'm going to show you. And I'm using a Ranger Mattes multi-medium. You could equally be using a gloss. I just am a little bit more partial to the matte finish, but it still acts as a sealer and it will still allow me to create the shading that I will show you once my collage is complete. So you can see I'm just mixing and matching all my papers, just creating a little pleasing patchwork. I've got my little sheet of romantic music that I got off the internet, off Pinterest, and I'm just layering up some of those elements on my tag. One of the most important things to get a nice finish on this kind of project is to make sure that everything is glued down nice and secure, so that there's no sort of little ends that are going to poke up on your project once you're finished. So do spend a little bit of time making sure that you glue everything down well, and then trim off all the edges. And obviously I'm going to repeat that process on my little square, but you don't really need to be watching everything as a repeat, but you get the gist of the process. It's all about building up the layers of your little patterned pieces and creating a pleasing patchwork to work on. So you can see here that I've repeated that heart motif so that it runs through from my tag onto my little 3-inch square. And this little heart is going to take the place of the felt heart that Tim had on his tag, because I actually don't have any felt, and this is sort of my little interpretation of that heart on the tag that he made. So the first thing that I'm going to do is just scruffy the edges of both of my projects. So I like to take the edge of my scissors and just scuff them along the edge of the card. And you can see I'm using my fingers to support the paper, and if I see any little edges pop up as I do this, I'm going to glue them back down. Now I'm thinking this is looking all a little bit shabby chic, so hence the sort of fluffing of the edges of my tag, because it does go well with this look. Now, because I want to keep this all nice, light and romantic, I'm taking my white distress paint, Picket Fence, and I am just rubbing a little bit of it with my finger over my project. And that just has the effect of just lightening all those patterns slightly. So I'm just doing exactly the same thing on my tag, and then I'm taking the actual dauber of the paint applicator, and you can see just how that's dulling those colours slightly, and then adding a little bit of a white border around the edge of my tag. Then obviously you need to make sure everything's nice and dry before you move on to sealing it with the matte multi-medium. And after the paint, I just brushed over a layer of that matte multi-medium. I seem to have missed it on camera, so I'm not quite sure how, but this tag has been completely covered in a layer of that matte multi-medium, which will act as a seal and will allow me to use my big brush Pit pen. Now these are by Faber-Castell, and they're new to my little collection of crafting goodies, and I would like to say Santa bought them, but my mum did really, and she treated me to this lovely box of pens, and this is the first time of me using them, and you can see how well they work. Once the paper's sealed, I wouldn't try this on paper that's not sealed because it will sink straight in and you won't be able to get that blended effect. But because I've sealed the paper, I can go around the edges of each of the elements of my collage, and where they overlap other elements create a shadow, and that will give me a 3D effect. I'm using a warm grey because I thought it was the colour that best went with my project. I'm keeping things slow at the moment so you can see what I'm doing. So I'm working a section at a time because I don't want this ink to dry, because once it's dried it's permanent, and I don't want that to happen. So I'm just working an edge at a time, working out which edges are on the top and which ones should be shadowed. And then while the ink is still wet, I'm just brushing my finger along the line of ink just to fade it out slightly. So I'm going to go around all of the shapes on my paper collage, and it will give everything a little bit of extra dimension. Now I really loved this technique. It was really easy to do but very effective. Great way of using up scraps, and it would work on so many different things. Great for a card background, scrapbook background, or scrapbook page background, or art journal background. It really is a very versatile technique, and like I said, you can make it in any combination of papers that you might have, and come up with lots and lots of lovely schemes to create this lovely paper collage, which makes a fab background for any of your paper crafting projects. And I'm repeating the whole process on my little 3-inch square. One thing I'll say, if you're using a pen like this, be 100% sure, and I really was good this time because I've got a habit of ruining pens by working on a wet surface. These weren't cheap pens, so I'm definitely looking after them, and I'm also using the ink just to go around the edges, just to add a little bit of definition to the edges of each of my paper collages. Now, if you do make a mistake, you just saw me there wiping off a little bit of excess ink. If you're quick, get out your baby wipe. You can rub over the surface and remove any ink that's gotten into places that you don't want it. You can see just how that lifts and layers up, really adds dimension to that project. So I'm having a little look at what elements Tim used and what elements I do have at my disposal, and I'm going to start to bring these two little projects together. So next I was thinking about incorporating the number 14 on my tag, just as Tim did, I'm going to use a brad for this. So this is one of the customizable brads that you can get in the Ideology range. I'm using one of the stickers as a template to get my circle the right shape. Obviously I want it to be in the colours that I'm using, and none of the little stickers are suitable for what I'm doing. So that doesn't stop you from customizing these with your own little circles of paper. So I'm using some of the darker pink that I've got on my tag, and I'm just attaching them to my brads with a little tiny bit of glue. So the next thing that I want to do is add a few little text elements, and I've got these rub-ons again from Ideology. I'm just looking for the right size number to put the number 14 on each of my little brads, so I can get these little numbers for the teeny tiny tag. And you can see I'm just using my little arrow. Actually proved to be quite a nice tool for rubbing on the rub-ons. And I'm adding the number 14. A little bit fiddly, but I think it was worth the effort. Just making sure my numbers line up and then rubbing the number into position. And then once you've got everything in place on your little brad, you add the little epoxy sticker to the top, and it's just as if you've bought this little element especially for this project. So it really is fun to be able to customize these brads in this way, and I find them quite versatile, and they're definitely worth the investment because, like I said, you don't have to use the little stickers that come with it, although they're quite nice as well. You can use them in different ways. For instance, I could put a little photograph on here if I wanted to. So again, just with a slightly larger number this time for my tag, and rubbing on the number 14 and then attaching that little epoxy sticker to the top. So now it looks like I've got a lovely enamel brad, and I'm just working out where I'm going to put it. I think I'm going to put it in the centre of this flower. And you can see I'm treating that little heart shape as if it were one, and adding the wings where I think that's where they're going to end up. I can't always promise at this stage that's where they'll end up. And I've got a little arrow for the square, and I've got a larger arrow for the tag. And I also wanted to add some romantic words to my tag. So I'm going to take some of the more romantic phrases from this little rub-on sheet. And I'm just going to add them to the different little elements on my paper collage. And while I'm doing that, I'm going to attach the little brad. Careful not to poke your fingers with the knife, done that a few times. Really, I should get my little bit of foam out and use my poker tool, but I know you can hear me when I say sometimes you just can't be bothered and you take the quickest route, which doesn't always end well. But no blood is spilt this time round. I'm adding some little heart brads that I had in my stash to the end of this little word strip, and then I'm going to carry on adding some more romantic words. Now, thinking about my little sampler squares, I'm just going to show you the one that I did for my January little square. There are some elements that I think I'll be best repeating in order to make this into a little set, although they will look quite different because obviously they will have different techniques and a different theme depending on the tags as we go through the month, or sorry, through the year. I want to repeat some of the elements. So framing each of my little squares, just as I do my tags, will bring them together and make them look more like a family that belong together, as well as adding a little bit of stitching. So I think I probably will add stitching to all of my tags and all of my little squares. And I'm also going to add the month using the little black stickers that you can see on screen. So I'm just getting out my little sewing machine. You will have seen this before many times on different little projects. It's a great way just to add a little bit of stitching to small items, I just have to be a little bit careful because it sews in a kind of chain stitch, and if I'm not careful I can unravel it as I take it out of the machine. So I'm not going to sort of go into too much detail about this. You could do this stitching by hand if you wanted to, or you could use a larger sewing machine. It just so happens that I have this little machine and it works for me. All I've got to do at the end of each little bit of stitching is make sure I spend a little bit of time securing the threads so that they don't unravel. So I'm also going to use it to attach this little bit of lace. This is something that Tim did on his tag, so I'm going to pinch that element and I'm going to just add a little bit of lace to each of my pieces, so to my tag and to my little 3-inch square. So the stitching is done and all the threads are secured, so I've tied them off and then just added a little dot of glue to the back of the tag to make sure that they stay in place. And as you can see, I've sewn on that little strip of lace. So the next thing that I wanted to do was add a couple more words. So again, I'm just looking for the romantic phrases on this little sheet, trying not to decimate it in the process, and then I'm adding them to some of the elements on the background of my tag. So just adding little touches of interest to that paper collage. I'm going to use these little ideology stickers to add the month of February, make sure I spell it right, to my little patchwork piece. And I think I'm just going to add a little bit of glue because of that stitching to make sure that they stay in place. And then I'm also just going to rub over them slightly with a little bit of the white paint to just make them blend in with the lighter background of this little patchwork piece. You can see that I've got lots of these lovely little sheets. They sort of remind me of the, oh, wouldn't fit there. So that's the beauty of glue. You've got a little bit of working time, so I'm just moving my letters to a place where they'll fit a little bit better. They were going to go over that little heart and I didn't want them to do that. And they fit perfectly here. So just lining them all up nicely. And you can see how these two are coming together and making more of a family of little squares by repeating some of the elements in both squares. The next thing I want to do is make a feature of that heart, the heart that's on both of my pieces. So I'm just going to gather a little bit of lace with a running stitch. It always take a little while to thread my needle these days. Sometimes think I need slightly better lenses in my glasses when I'm threading a needle. And you can see I just want to gather enough to go around the two halves of my heart, and I'm going to secure them in place with some strong double-sided tape. So I've just gathered enough lace to go around the edge of the heart, and then I'm just going to secure that into position with some strong double-sided tape. So it doesn't matter if the tape pleats as you go around the curve of the heart, because you won't be able to see it once it's underneath the lace. So I'm using a little bit of that double-sided tape that I've wrapped onto the back of the tag in order to secure and neaten that outside edge of the lace. And then I'm just arranging that gather so that it really emphasises that heart, because this is sort of my focal point on both pieces and is acting as my little felt heart that Tim used on his tag. So, and again, I'm just going to fold the excess round onto the back of the tag. Just need to gather a teeny tiny bit more, and then I'm tying off the thread to make sure that everything stays in place. A little bit of glue to make sure the edges don't fray, and neatening everything off. And then I'm just adding another one or two of those little hearts. And when you're working on all your little embellishments on your tags, it really is one of the fun parts of the process, just to move things around a bit. Don't be sort of set in stone. If it doesn't quite look right, just try it in lots of different positions until you get to where you want to be. So I want to add my little wings, actually not so little wings, they're quite heavy. Now the trick for me was, where was I going to put my rather hefty embellishments without covering up the lovely work that I've done on creating my paper collage? So you can see I'm having a little bit of a think, and while I do that I'm just going to finish the heart on the little 3-inch square. So I can't see all of the heart, and this time I'm going to try a free hand technique, and I'm just pleating it by hand around that little section of heart, and I'm not going to add any to the bottom because I've got that little layer of lace or strip of lace across the heart at the bottom. So you can see here the two designs are working together. Decided not to keep that heart there, it's just in the way, so I'm just repairing the little hole that I've created, and I'm going to attach the wing at that point. So I'm going to be using a little bit of paint just to knock these elements back a little bit. So I'm just shabbying them up a little bit by rubbing some of that paint into the grooves of the metal elements that I'll be using, and then once it's dry I'm just going to sandpaper over the top to reveal a little bit more of the design. So when you're framing something like I am here, it really is important just to try on a few different shades of the colour that you think you might use. So by putting it on a lighter silver, it changes the look to the darker grey that I eventually decide to use. So the other thing is, I've used quite a warm grey for the shadowing and shading on my paper collage, so I'm trying to look for that sort of same warm shade of grey in my paper scraps, and that way it will complement the work that I've already done on each of the elements. I think I've got the right shade, so all that's left for me to do is really make sure that I've got a good adhesion between the two layers. Obviously I've got little brads and things and bits of sewing on the back of the piece now, so I'm just spending a little bit of time making sure that that glue really does its job and keeps the two layers nice and flat and joined together. So repeating the process with the tag. Obviously this time I've just got to trim up that top edge and re-punch the hole in the top of the tag. And now that I've framed my tag, I can just cut out my original inspiration, which was Tim's February tag, and add it to the back of my tag, one to remind me of the month and the year that I made my tag, but to also remind me of where I started with my creative journey. So I'm just going to add a simple little lace tie to the top of the tag. I don't think I need anything more fussy than that, as there's a lot going on the front of the tag. So I think I'm almost there. I just want to add these gorgeous arrows onto my two pieces, and I've decided that they're going to have a little bit of dangle, which I seem to be working on off camera at the moment. I've got some old little bits of broken jewellery, and one of them had these gorgeous blue beads, which are perfect for the little blue pattern papers that I've used on my collage background, and I'm using them as they were attached to this little bit of jewellery, and I'm just adding some little bead embellishments to each of my little arrows. And I've also hunted out a few little pink beads, so I'm using the same little hangers but stripping off the beads that are already on them, and instead re-threading the little pink beads onto the wires. So I'm removing the pearl and adding two little pink beads instead, and that way I end up with a little selection of bead decorations that match the papers that I've used on each of my little collage pieces. It's funny, when I disappear off camera, I almost want to press a cursor or something to just put me back in shot. I know what happens. It's because some of the things that you craft with are a little bit more fiddly, and you just automatically bring them closer to you and hence out of the shot, or out of the all-seeing eye of the camera. I'm managing to show you here exactly what I'm doing. So I'm just sort of repurposing the bits that were dangling on this jewellery to suit my project, and I'm just using little bits of broken chain and links from other projects, other little bits of broken jewellery that I've collected that will work for this little piece. So I'm just adding a little tiny key charm, so just using an old chain from a piece of chain, an old chain link, and then I'm going to use that to add a little bit of dangle to the key charm and attach it to, I don't know whether it's, is it a shaft of an arrow? You know, the long bit in between the feather and the point. So there you can see I've just added hot glue underneath the little point and the feather of the arrow. I've really attached it right at the bottom of my tag, and I've made sure that that glue allows those little dangly beads that I've added to the arrow to move freely. And then I'm just going to tie a simple, no I'm not, yes I am. I'm just going to tie a simple knot in the top of my piece of lace to make sure that it stays in place. Got a nice piece of glue sticking to my finger there. And then just trimming off those ends. Now when you're working with something like this that frays, you could add a little touch of glue to the end of your lace, and that will help make it last a little bit longer before it frays. You just want to make sure that any glue you do add is one that dries clear, otherwise it could look a bit messy. So I just want to add another little bit of colour to my ribbon, so I'm just taking off a couple of the little beads from this piece of jewellery, and I'm going to attach them to the ribbon at the top of the tag. A little bit fiddly to get it closed up again, but it's worth the effort. So just adding that little touch of glue to the ends of the ribbon. You can always tell when I'm coming to the end of the project. Just push everything out of the way. Make it look like I didn't create any mess at all. Yeah, just shove it out of the way. So there we have it, a tag and a little 3-inch sampler piece ready to make my work of art at the end of the year. So I hope you've enjoyed watching this process and that I've inspired you to give this tag making malarkey a go. It really is great fun, a great way to practice lots of different techniques, and I definitely recommend joining in with Tim's 12 Tags of 2015. You'll see lots of inspiration over there. There's lots of great work going on with other artists who like to make tags and of course who like to use Tim Holtz products. So here they are out in the daylight in my garden. I always get the best shots of the colours, I think, by taking my projects out into the daylight. And I hope that you can see all the fun that I had creating that gorgeous collage. I really love this technique and I'm definitely going to be doing it again. And I did. I'll share a link with you for that project at the end of this video. So don't forget to stay tuned for those links. I'm also going to give you the link to a giveaway that I'm running at the moment. So if you've enjoyed this video, don't forget to hit the subscribe button, the like button and the share button. And I'll see you again shortly with some more creativity. Thank you for watching. So this first link is one to a little giveaway that I'm running this month. It finishes on the 14th of March 2015 if you're watching this a bit later on. And if you follow this link you can find out the details of how you can join in this little giveaway of rubber dance stamps. This link will take you to all of my altered art journal pages. So if you're interested in mixed media and altering books, this is the playlist for you. What about card making? This is one of the cards that I've got on my little card making playlist, and if you want to have a few ideas for making cards, this is the playlist for you. And last but not least, why not join me over at my Etsy shop to check out projects like this. I sell online workshops where you get full video tutorials as well as photograph instructions to step you through making projects like these. This is the tag storage project, and this is one that I Zentangled earlier. I spent a year with the gorgeous gang over at Tag Tuesday making Zentangle tags for an alphabet challenge that they ran one year, and I ended up with a whole set of tags all with different patterns beginning with a certain letter, so a good reference library for Zentangle patterns. As I neared the end of the project, I needed somewhere to store all that hard work so that I could just flick through them whenever I wanted to add a little bit of Zentangling to a project. And this is what I came up with. I had great fun Zentangling the entire tag storage unit. You could also make it Christmas. Why not make a tag for every day on the run up to Christmas? And you could then just pop a photograph and a little bit of journaling to record the run up to Christmas. And this is the steampunk version I made for my 12 tags of 2014. I've got to come up with an idea for 2015. I think I'm going a bit mixed media for this one. So definitely a project well worth making if you're a tag artist like I am. So please pop along to my Etsy shop and check out the workshops that I currently have available, and we could be crafting together on a project like this very soon.